All right, in this episode, we're going to get right into the Commanders traveling to Atlanta to take on the Falcons. They were able to win the game 24 to 16. For the Commanders on the offensive side of the ball, Sam Howell, kind of a weird week. 14 of 23, 151 yards, threw 3 touchdowns, so that really salvaged his fantasy week. 18.3 fantasy points. He is currently the quarterback 11 fantasy wise, so I mean, he's shown he's more than capable fantasy wise. And when you have a quarterback that is quarterback 11, your receivers are also going to be doing pretty decent. Someone whose production I feel like has slipped a little bit is Brian Robinson. He finished this game 10 carries, 31 yards, 2 catches for 25 yards. He got a touchdown, which really helped him. He only had 2 targets through the air, 13.6 fantasy points, only played 53% of the snaps. It's weird because we see Antonio Gibson biting into his snap share, but Antonio Gibson isn't doing like too much when he's on the field. They've had a couple games where he's getting 5 or 6 catches. That wasn't the case this game. Gibson 3 carries, 15 yards, 1 catch for 1 yard, scored a touchdown on 1 target. So he finished 8.6 fantasy points, 39% snap share. But again, when you take away that touchdown, we'd be looking at 2.6. It's just tough. I just Gibson's involved in the offense, but when he's out there, there's games where he's not involved. I think it's a case where if you're a Brian Robinson owner, it's worth rostering Antonio Gibson, but I like guys like Tyjae Spears a lot more. It's just
Yeah, it's hard to trust any guys who aren't really even breaking that 50% threshold because
yeah.
you're literally counting on home run plays.
Yeah.
It's like if they're every play they're out there, if they're not getting targeted or if they're not getting some kind of production touching the ball, then it's just not very valuable.
Yeah, and then I mean for the pass catchers again, Howell only completed 14 passes, so it was a bit sparingly through the air. Scary Terry saw 11 targets. He caught 6 of them for 81 yards, 14.1 fantasy points. The only other viable fantasy option through the air in the receiver room, Curtis Samuel, saw 4 targets, caught all 4 of them, 42 yards and a touchdown. Something worth noting is now through 6 weeks, Scary Terry has 77.2 fantasy points. Curtis Samuel has 75.5. Scary Terry is obviously the number one there. It's just kind of one of those stats you look at, checking in 6 weeks into the season, and they are neck and neck in fantasy points. Mainly, Scary Terry is a guy I'm starting every week, but Curtis Samuel is starting to become. He has a touchdown in each of the last 3 weeks. But again, when you're looking at guys like a Gabe Davis, red zone threats for teams that are passing for a significant amount of touchdowns, I mean, they're solid options. Curtis Samuel has emerged as the wide receiver too. Jahan Dotson played 80% of the snaps this week, saw 1 target, didn't catch it, gave you a big old goose egg. It's just, if you're going to trust receivers there, it's Scary Terry and Curtis Samuel. I mean, Jahan Dotson, it's crazy to say. I feel like he's droppable at this point. He just has not
Yeah.
really done anything.
I mean, he's out there. He played 41 of the 51 offensive snaps. He's out there 9 more snaps than Curtis Samuel. But to me, Curtis Samuel is just like we've talked about. Curtis Samuel is the guy who kind of the enemy feels he can use in different ways. I mean, his day would have been a lot bigger. I think like a 20-yard pass went off of his fingertips. And it's hard to trust him when he hasn't given you any production this year. Last year was great, but it's a different quarterback. It's a different offensive coaching staff, uh, or just be enemy. But still, obviously, everything's going to change in that regard. And it just makes it hard to trust Dotson. I like Samuel miles and miles more.
Yeah, and then sticking with the trend of a bad game for Jahan Dotson, Logan Thomas saw 1 target,
Yeah.
caught it for
I
2
don't know
yards. It's one of
what
those,
happened here, man.
yeah, 1.2 fantasy points. It's one of those things we've seen him be heavily involved, but again, Sam Howell only completed 14 passes. He only passed the ball 23 times. They didn't have to pass it more than that to win this. It was just it was an ugly game. I mean, they win 24-16, but when you're looking at the stats, you pass for 151 yards. Brian Robinson gives you 31 on the ground, Gibson 15. It's like you look at it and you're like, how did they score 24 points? They just
Yeah. And I mean, to keep it a bill, man, the Falcons defense has been kind of sneaky good.
yeah.
They've given up some points. They've given up 120, which isn't by any means the most in the league, but they're giving up 20 points per game, which, you know, it's more along the line. They're only giving up 99 rushing yards per game and 179 through the air, which, I mean, we kind of saw.
Yeah.
It's just hard to. I don't know. The Falcons are, I guess, one of those teams where you kind of have to think twice about starting a guy like the number 2, number 3 receiver on that team. Maybe just think twice about it.
Yeah. And I mean, getting to the Falcons side of the ball, at least when you look at stats, it's kind of hard to see how they lost this game. Desmond Ridder, again, the Commanders' secondary has not been good by any means, but neither has Desmond Ridder, other than last week and now this week as well. He had another very solid game. He threw the ball 47 times, completed 28 of them, 307 yards, 2 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, and that I was just thinking of the last one where he just floated it right to the guy to lose the game. I mean, what's crazy is Desmond Ridder, I mean, he scored 19.08 fantasy points. He was the QB4 on the week. The lowest he can fall is if he's outscored by Dak and Herbert, he'll fall to QB6. I mean, that's just crazy. I'm still not rostering Desmond Ridder. I'm still not looking at him as a viable option. He's had a couple hot weeks. Good on him. Good for Falcons fantasy owners, but I don't trust him at all yet. I still think he's a bottom QB in the league. He's just, I mean, good on him though. He's had a good couple games.
Yeah, there's not too much more to say about Ridder. I don't think he's a very good real life quarterback. Could I be wrong about that? Yes, but I don't think I am so far. It's 2 300-yard weeks in a row, but man, I just don't know. I watch Desmond Ridder play, and sometimes it's like, damn, that was a good pass. Sometimes I'm like, why the hell did you even think about throwing that? It's just what you get watching the Falcons. The one thing that did make me, pretty happy was seeing that they are actually willing to air the ball out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
and I mean, getting to the receivers, they did air it out. Drake London had another very good game. 9 catches, 125 yards on 12 targets, 21.5 fantasy points. When you score 21 fantasy points without a touchdown, I mean, you can't ask for more than that. Drake London's starting to become a guy. He's had 3-4 solid weeks in a row. I mean, he's a guy that you for sure at least can throw in at your flex, if not QB3 or wide receiver 3 at this point. I mean, he's proving, if Desmond Ridder can get it done through the air as he has, and even the games he struggles in, it seems like the one wide receiver he's finding is Drake London, and rightfully so. I mean, not too much more to say about him. He's been solid.
No, yeah, and it's like if you watch Drake London play, like I said, I'm happy that they're willing to air the ball out, because a lot of the times Desmond Ridder doesn't need to necessarily throw a perfect ball to Drake London. He's freaky athletic and can go up and get the ball. He's a great possession receiver. Like, Drake London is great. And if they're going to continue throwing the ball, Drake London is making his way more and more towards an every week starter, because he's the number 1 guy there, and that goes without question.
Yeah. And then, the tight ends, it's weird because Kyle Pitts has kind of emerged and Jonnu Smith is still just hanging on to fantasy relevancy.
He ain't going anywhere.
No. Kyle Pitts had 6 targets, 4 catches, 43 yards with a touchdown, 14.3 fantasy points, 55% of the snaps. Jonnu saw 5 targets, 4 catches, 36 yards, a touchdown, 13.6 fantasy points, 54%. They're fantasy-wise and snap in the passing offense. At least fantasy wise, they are an upgrade from the Bills tight ends. I mean, it's getting to the point. I mean, Kyle Pitts, crazy talented. He's having some solid weeks. I think people are starting to feel a little more comfortable starting him. And then for Jonnu Smith, I mean, depending on the matchup, like Schiff said, he's just not going anywhere. I mean, he's not a guy I
No.
hate starting. He's out there, even if when it's around 50%, I mean, he's getting the targets, he's making use of them. Just depending on the matchup, if they play a defense like the Commanders again, if that's the matchup and you want to roll him over, I mean, it's crazy, but like over like a George Kittle who just hasn't produced. His offense is so loaded, they just don't need him a lot of the time. And that's not the case for like a Kyle Pitts, for a Jonnu Smith. They need these guys.
Yeah, a lot because after Drake London, it's Kyle
Mac
Pitts, Johnny
Hollins.
Smith, and then MF Hollins.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, no hate towards Matt Collins. Love the guy, but
Yeah,
come
fantasy
on.
wise, it's just, yeah, no.
Like, come on.
And, lastly, Bijan, an interesting week. I mean, he was solid. He finished 13 carries, 37 yards, 5 catches for 43 on 8 targets, 13 fantasy points flat, played 77% of snaps. Looking at his stats through the season, he has 3 games where he's below 3.5 yards a carry, in 3 games where it's 5.6 yards a carry or above. 3 games where he's uber efficient running the ball, 20 points, 21, 18.7. The 3 games he's not, 10 points, 11, 13. So I think we see his floor. That 10-point week is like his absolute floor because he's getting 5 to 6 targets a game and normally catching 3 to 4 of those at least and getting, 20, 25, 30 yards on the low end receiving wise. But it's just one of those things. I mean, Bijan's crazy talented, but we're seeing, their next couple games, they go to Tampa, then they go to Tennessee. So at least on the ground, I don't love his matchups coming up. You're obviously starting him. He has the ability to make it happen on the ground still and also through the air. But we're seeing, the Falcons their rush protection on the offensive line isn't the greatest. And I mean, it's kind of weird with Arthur Smith, they want to ground and pound, but they just haven't been able to super successfully.
No, yeah, and I mean, this is funny because before the year, it was like, oh, why did the Falcons get Bijan? They have Algier who got it. Yeah, well, I hate to say it, but if you force feed any goddamn player, they're probably gonna get 1,000 yards season. I mean, I don't mean to take away from Tyler Algier, but let's be honest, like he's not that good of a running back,
No.
and at least in regards to comparing him to Bijan Robinson, it's funny because I think Bijan, it might be crazy to say, but Bijan is who we wanted Jahmyr Gibbs to be.
Yeah.
Because Bijan is kind of like the next Alvin Kamara.
Yeah.
Might not be, he might not have the most efficient games on the ground, but he's going to get it done through the passing.
Mm-hmm.
And we love that. That's, in PPR, the catches are worth more than the damn runs anyways. So we like that a lot. So that is one thing. I think Bijan is kind of like that next Alvin Kamara archetype that we're just not going to see Jahmyr Gibbs get that work that we wanted it to, level out to. But that's one thing for another time.
Yeah. But I mean, that's all I had for this game. Did you have anything else for it?
No. Go Young Wei Koo.
Go Young Wei Koo. That'll do it for this one. Again, drop any questions, comments you have below. We always appreciate the support. And stay tuned for the next one.
Yes, sir.